All right, so the bishops wrote a creed and everything was solved. Problem not solved. Arianism actually stays around for a long, long time. So even though Arius and his followers were condemned, and Constantine even exiled them, this was not the end for them. Eusebius of Nicaea was a very, very capable and influential man who we actually believe was distantly related to the emperor. And he was able to present his case to Constantine without all the other bishops present. And he obviously did a very, very good job because Constantine allowed him to return to Nicaea. And then Eusebius actually convinces the emperor that he should lift the ban on Arius as well. They even convinced Constantine to exile Athanasius, who I'll talk about in a minute, who had become the bishop of Alexandria after Alexander had died in 328. So Constantine orders the bishop of Constantinople to restore Arius to communion with the church in 336. On the way to the church, Arius drops dead. Okay, there's some debate as to the cause of this. In the early church, Christians are like, well, God obviously just struck him down in the street. More recent historians have suggested maybe he was poisoned, but we don't know the actual cause of his death. Now, Constantine dies in 337. Eusebius of Nicaea, an Arian, actually administers the rite of baptism for Constantine on his deathbed. Okay, so Constantine finally gets baptized, but it's by an Arian Christian. So after Constantine dies, he leaves 3 sons in charge of the empire. They have different territory. Constantine II is in charge of Gaul, Britain, Spain, and Morocco. Constans has Italy and parts of North Africa. Constantinius II has most of the Eastern Empire. This guy was an Arian Christian as well. Also, do you notice he named all of his sons after himself? Anyway, in 353, Constantinius becomes the sole emperor and imposed Arian Christianity on the entire empire. St. Jerome, who we will talk about later, said the entire world awoke from a deep slumber and discovered that it was Arian. So let's talk a little bit about Athanasius. I have another video up on Moodle that you can watch, but I'll give you some basics here. He is considered the great champion of Nicene Christianity. He was Egyptian. He was born in Alexandria. His family was wealthy, so he was able to get an education, but he does not seem to be a member, he wasn't a member of the aristocracy, as some of these folks were. He became the secretary to Alexander, Bishop of Alexandria, and eventually was promoted to bishop himself. In the early church, the people actually elected the bishop. All right. He was exiled a total of 5 different times during his life for a total of 17 years. But throughout, he was this unflinching advocate of Nicene Christianity. Okay. Once Constantinius had full control of the empire, he ordered a synod just to condemn Athanasius. The bishops said that they couldn't do this because it was against church canon, and the emperor responds with this: "My will is also church canon." All right. Think about that for a second. A number of bishops did sign the condemnation, and those who didn't were also banished along with Athanasius. So the governor and soldiers come to get Athanasius, and the clergy protected him and got him to safety in the desert. And he hid among the desert monastics for 5 years until Constantinius died. And in those 5 years, the emperor did everything he could to destroy the decisions of Nicaea, including a summit that he called to condemn the Nicaea. All right, once Constantinius died, his cousin Julian takes the throne. Julian had actually been raised a Christian but rejected the faith, thus gaining himself the title the apostate. This is actually how he's been remembered in history, Julian the apostate. He actually attempted to cause chaos in the early church, and he did everything to subvert Christianity and the spread of it. To kind of understand him a little bit, he's actually a very interesting individual. And once you understand his background, you may see why he rejected Christianity so strongly. Being so closely related to the emperor had some really negative effects on his life. Once Constantine died and his sons were trying to consolidate power for themselves, basically they had all of their family members murdered. Okay, the only reason Julian was not killed is he was a small child, so he posed no threat to their rule. Okay, so given that was his background, you can see how maybe he was a little bit upset about the faith of his family that murdered the rest of his family. All right, so anyway, he tries to cause chaos. He knows that actual persecutions don't work because he's very well versed in the faith, and he knows the history, and he knows how martyrdoms actually just bolstered the faith. So he does things like causing chaos by recalling bishops from exile so Christians will fight amongst themselves. He reopened Greek and Roman churches to the old Greek and Roman gods. He attempted to rebuild the Jewish temple. So he did some pretty interesting things. And then after Julian, he dies in battle, though, only a couple years after he takes the throne. After he died, Valentinian, a Nicene Christian, takes over in the west, and Valens, an Arian, ruled in the east. However, after Valens is killed, Theodosius came to power, and he was also a Nicene Christian. He calls the Council of Constantinople, but we'll discuss that next time. From that point on, we have Christians reigning in the empire.